Today we're going to do a small introduction to decimals. Some of the things that you need to know, we're going to use what we know about place value, multiplication, and division to kind of understand decimals. So let's start with some of the things that we know from place value. So when we're counting, we start with what's called the ones place. And then if we move to the left, the next one we have is the tens place. Then we have the, over a little bit with that one, the hundreds place. And then if we keep moving over to the left, we have the thousands place. If you keep going, you'll have the tens, thousands place. And between the thousands and the hundreds, I'm gonna say right in between here is a comma. So, and there's a, so then there's 10,000s, then there's 100,000, then there's another comma, then there's millions. So when you start from the ones place and count to the left, every 3 places you end up with a comma. When we're talking about decimals, to the right of the ones place is where you have your decimal. And I want to put, I'm actually going to put this as instead, oops, I'm going to put this as a dot. So let me do this. I want to do it small enough that it, there we go. And then I'm going to fill it in. So that's our, let's try filling it in. There we go. Over, no. Let's go back. Control Z. Fill in. There we go. Is our decimal point. So usually that's a small decimal point, but that's really important where it's located in place value. It's directly to the right of the ones place. To the left of the ones place, we have what's called our tenths place. And our, to the right of that, we have the hundredths place. All right, so I know these are a little bit, some are up and some are down. They should all be on the same level, but those are our place value. Now, let me just draw. I want to put some lines in. I want to make sure they're kind of tiny. So in between each of these places, there we go. Let's do that one again. These places are our place value. This one comes right at the decimal point. And then here we go. And then I'll do hundreds. Now, if you actually, the next place, just to let you know, would be the thousandths place, but we're not going to worry about that one for now. Now, I'm going to kind of make these small. So, okay, if I take a number, say 1, and I put it in the ones place, that would just be 1. If I take that same number and I put it in the tens place, to make it 110, I usually put a 0 in the ones place, so that becomes 10. If I take that number and I put it in the hundreds place, it would become 100. And if I take that same 1 and I put it in the thousands place, it becomes 1,000. Okay, so that's really important. Where we place the digit, that's what we call that place value. And so whatever digits there is what it's named. So that's really important. Now, another thing that's really important is that we know that when we move it over, as we move it from the ones place, I'll put 1 here. For this one, I'm just going to move it here for this case. 10 is really equal. We know that that is equal to 1 times 10. If I move it to the hundreds place, we know that is equal to 10 from here, equal to 10 times 10. 10 times 10, well, let's see. 10 times 10 equals 100. And if I move it over here, 1,000, I'm going to change it. We know that this 100 times 10, so equals 100 times 10. I'm going to do this with a different number as well. So I'm going to change this to, say, let me erase all these ones. So I'm going to erase all these ones just so you can see it with a different number. I'm going to erase this one. This one. I'll leave these other numbers here for a moment. I'm going to erase these. I can do that with any digit. So let's do something different, like 8. So if I put an 8 in the ones place, 8 times 10 equals 80. 80 times 10 equals 800. And 800 times 10 equals 8,000. 800 times 10. So every time I move to the left, I'm moving this 8 to the left, it multiplies by 10. So if I move it to the left, it multiplies by 10. If I move this to the left, we multiply by 10. All right, so that should kind of be a review. But what happens when I want to not, well, move it to the left, but I want to move it, Control Z. I want to move it to the right. So what happens when I want to move it to the right? Let's go with this one, and I will draw across. Do a bigger size, but that's okay. All right, so let's take 7,000. A little bit bigger. So say I take 7,000 and I want to now move that 7 to the right. So then I make it 700. Well, what happened? I took, to get from 7,000 to get to 700, I took 7,000 and I divided it by 10. Well, say I do that again. I take 700 and I move it to the right. Then I have what did I do? I took 700 and I divided it by 10. If I want to move the 70 to that 7 to the right again, I took 70 and I divided that by 10. So every single time I move to the right, I divide by 10. Well, let's think about this then. I can take, again, let's put my decimal point here. Oops. See if that worked. Oh, no, it's too light. So let's just put a decimal point here. Maybe make it a little bigger. There we go. And I'm going to move this 7, I'm going to move it to the right. So I'm going to put it under the 10ths place. I'm going to I think I might rewrite that, but I actually, I can put a 0 here because there's nothing in the ones place. There's nothing in the ones place, and now there's a 7 in the 10ths place. What happened there? I took that 7 and divided it by 10. So any digit I move to the right, every time I move it to the right one place, it's you're taking a number and dividing it into 10. I'm going to talk for a moment about so if I take one whole thing and divide it into 10 pieces, I get something that looks like this. Okay, so I took one thing and I divided it into 10 equal pieces. So if I had, let's say from our earlier example, we had what was, let me write again, I'm going to write, I think I'll put it right here. Ones place, and then I have a decimal point, and then I have the 10ths place. Okay, I also, if I went this way, I would have the 10s place, etc. If I went over here, I would have the 100ths place. Not hundreds, but hundredths. It's very important to know when you're doing decimal, it ends with THS. Okay, so that's really important to know. All right, so if from my earlier example, so I had written out, I had taken a 7 and I moved it over here so it looked like this. It had a decimal point. There we go. And I said you can put a 0 in the ones place because there's no whole, there's just 7, and we read this as 7/10 as decimals. Well, I have 7 in the 10ths place, so I'm going to actually show you a visual model of what 7/10 looks like. No, that's 8. So there's 7/10. I actually know from fractions that if I colored it in, it would look like this. This is 7/10. So I can write 7/10 as 0.7, and I read it as, this is called, this one we say is 7/10 as a fraction, and this we still say 7/10, but we say 7/10 as a decimal. Okay, so I'm going to write out some, taking what I know, I'm going to write out in my, let me do some erasing here. So we can actually take this visual fraction model and we can write our decimals and our fractions underneath this visual fraction model. Actually, I think it would be easier if I just do new, and I'm going to put this in here and move it to the center, but I want to make it a little bit bigger, so let's see if we can do that. Maybe even a little bit wider than that. A little bit wider. Okay, and I'll move it back to the center. So if I were to, on top of each one of these, I'm going to write what it would be as a fraction on top. Let's make this pretty big. Actually, I could write it inside, but oh no. All right, so let's try that again. I'm going to make it all the way there. There we go. So if I were to say, so this is one whole thing, I am going to write it, if I colored in the first one, that would be 1/10 as a fraction, and as a decimal, I would write it as 0.1. So the next one would be, if I colored in two of them, it would be 2/10 as a fraction, and this is 2/10 as a decimal. That is a little decimal point right there. This is 3/10 as a fraction, and 3/10 as a decimal. 4/10 as a fraction, and 4/10 as a decimal. 5/10 as a fraction, and 5/10 as a decimal. 6/10 as a fraction. 6/10 as a decimal. 7/10 as a fraction. 7/10 as a decimal. 8/10 as a fraction, and 8/10 as a decimal. 9/10 as a fraction. 9/10 as a decimal. And 10/10 as a fraction, which is the same as one whole thing, and 10/10 as a decimal is also equal to one whole. Remember, from our place value, that 1 is in the ones column now, so it can also be read as 1 whole and 0/10. If I colored in all of this, I would have 1 whole and 0/10. I'm going to just show you a couple of, I'm going to do this again, because if I show you, see if I can do that. So if I kept going, I could do 11/10 as a fraction if I had two of these. So, and then I could write 11/10 as a decimal, but we know that this is an improper fraction, so we can say that's also equal to 1 whole, I wonder if I have space, yeah, 1 whole plus 1/10. And that's actually how I read it as a decimal too. I read it 1 and 1/10. So a decimal point can be read as and that's why when I teach, I don't like my students to say big numbers. some of my students, I'm going to do one. So I'll just do one more. I'm going to do 12 tenths as a fraction and 12 tenths, or we can read it as 1 and 2 tenths. So we can read that as 1 and 2 tenths. And so that's one of the reasons that I caution students to not use the word and when they're saying big numbers. So for instance, I sometimes have students that say, I ask them to read a big number. $3,725. They often say 3,725. And I say and means something very special in math. And means decimal point. So if they say 3,725, I say that looks like this: 3,725. That should just be a dot. That's a decimal. So 3,725 actually looks like this. All right, that is an introduction to decimals. I will talk a little bit in one more video about decimals to the hundredths place. So decimals to the hundredths place. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.